Hello, I'm Chai Haiyan. Welcome to Talk Thursday. It's been 6 months since Typhoon Yolanda or Haiyan devastated eastern Visayas, killing more than 6,300 people and displacing around 4.1 million. In the aftermath of the world's strongest typhoon to hit land, survivors are still struggling to fully recover. Food security, housing, and employment are still the main challenges, as government officials admit there's still no final rehabilitation plan in place. Helping badly hit areas is international development organization Oxfam. Oxfam has been providing food, clean water, sanitation, and shelter aid for 650,000 typhoon victims in Leyte, Eastern Samar, and Cebu. With us today is Oxfam humanitarian crisis expert Tariq Rebel. He will talk to us about the current situation of the survivors and discuss areas for improvement in handling the aftermath of the typhoon. Good afternoon, Tariq.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, we're glad to have you here with us. Could you tell us a little bit about what you've seen on the ground? I was told, I know that Oxfam has been very, very active in Tacloban.
Yeah, we're working in 4 areas, as you mentioned, in Western and Eastern Leyte, also in Samar and in Cebu. So we have a general overview of many different parts of affected areas. I think in general we've been shocked by the devastation caused. This is the fastest typhoon in recorded history, and besides the wind speeds, obviously the storm surge caused mass impact. So we're looking at vast amount of physical destruction, and then I think the second biggest issue we're looking at beyond the sheer shelter and physical destruction is livelihoods. Millions of people without incomes and jobs. It's unclear how that's going to be resolved.
It's been 6 months since Yolanda hit, and yesterday government officials admitted that there's no rehabilitation plan in place. Are you surprised?
Yes, I do think that's concerning, because again, it's been 6 months, and also I think from day one it was clear that the magnitude of this crisis would be beyond anything that the Philippines had seen. I think internally we're comparing it to Haiti, the earthquake in Haiti. We're comparing it to the tsunami of 2004 that affected Indonesia, Sri Lanka, and other countries. And I think at that scale there should have been immediately a big shift in terms of thinking big for the recovery phase.
So you think government is not doing enough, or resources aren't there? The response has not been as fast?
Sure. I mean, I think in terms of response, the response overall has been good. Not very good, but I think good. We've met the needs of people. Good enough. And it's, again, in terms of the scale, that's good. The humanitarian assistance has the basic humanitarian needs have been met. But I think when we look at who has done that, it's been a lot of international NGOs such as Oxfam. The Red Cross has been very active. We've had the private sector that has been very big. And then we've had foundations that have been active. The government has played a role in some ways, but some specific line ministries such as DSWD that have been active on the ground. But it has not been probably as active as we would have thought.
How would you assess the response of the local government? Has it improved? Because we understood that when the typhoon first struck, I guess they were overwhelmed, and there weren't enough resources, and they had to put together a team. But now it's been 6 months. Has there been some improvement that you've noticed?
Definitely. I mean, all of us were shocked, right? So I mean, it's totally understandable. We do feel that very quickly they switched gears, actually. And the technical capacity has been there. So for example, in Tacloban city, UNICEF and Oxfam were working with LMWD on restoring the water system of Tacloban city. And we saw that LMWD, for example, had a high level of technical expertise, the engineers and their capacity. But here also we see what's lacking, which has been that the funding was not necessarily available at the local level. So even where the capacity was there, the money didn't come down to the field level. And then at some point LGUs had to turn in terms of looking to INGOs, the Red Cross, private sector, to do the assistance because they just didn't have the budget for it.
So politics is still getting in the way. The national government is not responding fast enough to the needs of the local government. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I mean, I think if we compare the funding situation to other big crises in the world, such as Syria, South Sudan or Central African Republic, the funding has been good for the Philippines since early on. And the government has received a lot of donations and grants and loans, and so have all of us. Oxfam has received a huge amount of money as well. So the issue here is about getting that money to the ground, and that has not happened. So it's definitely not a funding problem.
The local government has also been saying that, well, national government has said that there should be no-build zones that should be identified, and this is for the safety of everyone. How realistic is that?
Yeah, this is a very complicated question. I mean, on the one hand, we're looking at the individual rights of people who have lived there for generations, that were very poor anyway, and so their only kind of possessions and livelihoods were linked to their shelter, and then, for example, being fisher folk, being close to the shore, or being coconut farmers. Now, in terms of declaring it no-build zone or an unsafe zone, I mean, the terminology is changing, or no-dwelling zone, we've had many labels. It is understandable in the sense that there's a high risk of people are facing by staying in these areas if the next storm surge happens. However, we need to balance that with the rights of people and also their livelihood question. So if we take a family of fishers, and we say, go 17 kilometers inland to a new community that we're constructing for you, well, this person only knows how to fish. And now you're saying you're 17 kilometers from the shoreline. So what is this person doing once the relief stops? And that critical question needs to be resolved, because otherwise people will force their way back into the unsafe zones, because that's all they know to do.
Oxfam came up with a recent report. Could you tell us about the highlights, findings of your report when you spoke to, I think, over 400 respondents? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. We interviewed 453 individuals across the areas we work in. They're all people affected directly by the relocation schemes the government is proposing. Yeah. So they're either they have been moved or in the process of being moved. I think more than 90% of them are saying they have not had any consultation with any government official, either local or national, on this process. They have just been informed at some point, but there's been no consultation. And more than 80% are saying that they actually don't even know how to define their status, what are their rights, what is their legal quandary, kind of what are their legal rights, and can they have any recourse? And the biggest need finally that came up was livelihoods, which is what I just mentioned. The fact that actually maybe we're focusing a lot on shelter and on no-build zones, but people are worried about livelihoods. They're worried about, well, yes, I need to move or I need to be moved, but what am I doing for income? How do I feed my family?
What are NGOs and other international aid groups trying to do to fill in the gap insofar as livelihood is concerned?
Sure. So at this scale, we're looking at the different phases of response. So we're kind of in the phase called early recovery in the terminology, which is the second phase after the response phase. Yeah. That means we're really looking at stabilizing the situation. So the immediate basic needs are met. Now we're looking at repairing broken structures. For Oxfam, for example, we're looking at specifically at water systems, at sanitation, broken latrines and toilets, and making sure that there's no outbreak of diseases. The next phase is going to be the critical one. That's the recovery reconstruction phase, and this is the one that really is going to be the make or break it point. So I think the early recovery and relief has been okay, and there's been nothing too dramatic going on there. But now, if we don't figure out how 4 million people are going to be housed, how these people are going to find work, then we're looking at a really big disaster, almost bigger maybe in terms of its impact than the immediate disaster of the typhoon. Because then we're looking at mass poverty in already some of the poorest areas of the Philippines.
I know that the SWD has been offering a cash for work, it has a cash for work program, and some other groups are also doing this to help provide employment no matter how temporary. And the Chuchi Foundation is
Yes.
is among those that's very active on the ground.
Yes.
Is this sufficient? And what are the dangers of having this kind of an arrangement?
Yeah, so one of our key activities was also Cash for Work and unconditional cash grants. We have supported 60,000 households total, so quite a big number. What cash does is it gives people the immediate ability to meet their needs as quickly as possible. Before the period of cash, we used to just give in-kind goods.
Yeah.
What we have seen is that the in-kind often has a negative impact, because what the in-kind does is it destroys the market completely. And in a country like the Philippines, you have a very vibrant private sector, you have a vibrant market. And by injecting cash, people then can go to the market and support local sari-sari stores, they can support local vendors, and you can try and get the economy back working. So that is the really nice thing of cash. The issue, of course, with cash is at some point you have to stop it, because it creates, like all assistance, it creates dependency.
Right.
And we are looking now at self-recovery, and that's exactly the switch from early recovery to reconstruction. We need to get out of these sort of assistance methods in the next weeks, because otherwise, well, people have nothing else. They're just waiting for us or DSWD or Chuchi to give them money, but they need to now get back to supporting themselves.
And we also heard from the ground that there's been some sort of a bidding war, that people would not work because this other group offers higher pay.
Yes, so
and it's not very healthy.
So Chuchi is a very interesting phenomenon. We don't encounter it very often in the relief sector. They have been, they're there, obviously huge. They're massive in Tacloban and had a big impact, but we haven't actually encountered them. Not just Oxfam, but all of us.
This is the first time that you've encountered them?
Well, yes, and even we have not met them in Tacloban. Like, we don't know, like you're talking to me now, I've never had a discussion with them. Our team on the ground, so we don't know what their strategy is, we don't know what they're planning, and exactly, for example, the unit costs for the cash was not clear to us. So we found out once it started happening, and sometimes it happened in barangays we were working next to. So we're paying half of what they're paying, and we have kind of this exodus of people fleeing our barangays. So it causes very practical problems. But of course, it should not go without saying that Chuchi had a massive positive impact as well, despite all of these kind of lack of coordination. It brought in a lot of money, and I think people are very grateful in Eastern Leyte.
How about, I think Ping Lacson has mentioned this now as the rehabilitation czar. He said that it's very bureaucratic. There are certain, as far as response is concerned, there are a lot of requirements that have to be complied with. Do you think he's the best person to be assigned to this important role, this task?
I mean, I think this is almost an impossible task. I think we need to be very clear about, again, the scale. We're looking at a Haiti earthquake dimension, and no one is just going to figure this out. I think what is required really is a very high level of technical expertise, obviously a lot of specialist advisors in terms of the questions around agriculture and livelihoods, around urban livelihoods and urban migration, around education, healthcare, and so on and so on. So it's more about having a group of very high-level individuals that are leading this process.
And his background is peace and order.
Yes. So I think in that approach, then you would expect a big support from these kind of very high-level people that are supporting that.
How about LGUs? Are they empowered enough? Do they know what they're doing?
I think with the LGUs, as I mentioned, they're overwhelmed. They are willing, but their capacity is limited. And then you have a whole range. You have some that are stronger and some that are weaker. What they're clearly missing is money. They do not have money from the central government. So they have no capacity. Even if they have the capacity to do something, they cannot do it because they have no means to do it with. So they can only do non-financial activities essentially, which is not much, because what we need now is kind of this heavy sort of assistance. The second part is that they lost all their assets. I mean, they lost all documentation, they lost their barangay halls, the municipal halls, everything. Everything is gone. ID papers, any sort of paperwork, right? Deeds, contracts.
But there have been mayors from Tanawan, I think, and
Yes.
even Giwan, who've managed, and
Yes.
they've done pretty well. So
Yes.
the question that's coming to mind is it just a matter of skill? Because some mayors are probably better. They know how to handle disasters better than others.
So I would say some mayors are more equal than others, maybe. So the mayors of cities like Tacloban or Ormoc, Giwan,
Yes.
are very powerful people who have their own networks independent of other structures. And they can draw on these resources. They can even draw on funding. They're raising funds themselves. There's a big Tacloban reconstruction plan which is developed at the municipal level. And so those municipalities are obviously performing better. The issue for us is that is good for the people living there. What is bad is that it's going to exacerbate the inequality, because a city like Tacloban or Ormoc or Giwan was already better off than the more rural areas affected by the typhoon. Now those areas like Tacloban are raising money and getting a lot of assistance, and then these smaller municipalities are going to fall back even more than they were already. So this is a big risk, and this is where the national government needs to intervene to even out the playing field and give even more assistance to those smaller communities in terms of helping them not fall behind even further.
Is it acceptable to say that, well, this is a major disaster as far as the Philippines is concerned? It's probably the first that we've experienced of this magnitude, and maybe the national government doesn't know how to handle it. How do we compare to other countries like Syria, Aceh, for example?
Yes.
Is this an excuse? Is this a legitimate reason?
Yes, I mean, I think, like I said, the discussion starts with realizing this is on a global scale, this is horrific. And the US government didn't deal well with Katrina, the Japanese government didn't deal well with Fukushima.
Yeah.
So this overwhelms anyone, even the richest governments in the world. I think what in the Philippines we had thought was the structures such as NDRMC and policies were quite advanced compared to their peers, and the Philippines had thought things through in terms of its policies. What is now come out in Haiyan is that maybe that step from theory to practice needs to be better tuned and needs to be better rehearsed. So unfortunately, Haiyan won't be the last, just in terms of statistics, it won't be the last super typhoon the Philippines will see. The next one could be faster, just like Haiyan was faster than Bofa. So for the next time, in the months and years, because we don't know when this will happen or if there will be a big earthquake, we're seeing all the
God
tremors.
forbid.
Exactly, God forbid. There's many scenarios, not just the super typhoon, that could affect. So the Philippines needs to now work on this direct implementation. How does this funding and these policies actually get translated to on-the-ground action?
Will it help if we create an agency that's similar to FEMA in the US? Because that's what some of the policymakers have been saying, that maybe we need one agency, one government unit that will just focus on disasters.
Yes, and this is something that that many of us are discussing kind of as one option. I think this is a credible option to look at. Let's first recognize that FEMA failed in Katrina, famously. And maybe the reasons it failed are reasons that would have to, if there was such a construct, would have to be critically examined, which is that, one, there are already many line ministries in the Philippines with overlapping mandates. And this is, I think, one of the things slowing down the delivery of assistance. Now, if you add another one, then you're just adding to the competition.
That's another layer of the bureaucracy.
Exactly. So that would have to be clearly avoided in terms of a clear mandate and a clear step aside of the other agencies, so that this agency can operate independently and quickly. That agency would then also be a super agency, so it would have to have all of the different technical expertise that you need, not just one or two sectors, but all the sectors. So you need healthcare and WASH and livelihoods and shelter and protection, all of that in one agency. So those are kind of the issues around the FEMA, but definitely the current model does need to be reviewed, I think.
How long do you think will recovery take? As we're anticipating that, yeah, maybe come June or July, in the next few months, more rains will come, or
Yes.
who knows if there would be the next another disaster could strike, and we're barely recovering and we're barely moving people to decent houses. How long will this take?
Haiti has taken 4 years and it is still struggling. The tsunami areas took 5 years maybe until they emerged kind of out of the tsunami effect.
5 years.
So I think 3 years is realistic at least, but we should be looking even at 5 years. Now that's assuming a linear reconstruction without these disasters. I think realistically there will be disasters in the Visayas, whether it be many typhoons or one big super typhoon or an earthquake. If you factor that in, what needs to be established in the reconstruction process are catch mechanisms that make sure that that drop for the next disaster, the next big one, is not as steep as the drop of Haiyan was. That would be a big success. So we have to be realistic, and here we're quite worried that in terms of, for example, evacuation centers,
Yeah.
they're gone. IOM, an agency that is very present on the ground, released a report in summer saying that of 634 evac centers, more than 90%, 92% were destroyed.
Oh God.
So the issue is that a next typhoon, let's say one that's a third of the wind speeds of Haiyan, with a storm surge, could have a bigger death toll, could have more destruction than Haiyan. Because Haiyan, there was some resistance. There were the trees, there was the infrastructure, the buildings.
But then now those are done.
Now those are
down.
33 million trees are gone. All the evac centers are gone. So what are people hiding from and behind in terms of protecting themselves? So that's a very, very real risk. That's also why the reconstruction needs to be very well thought through, because we can't just have a linear plan. It's not going to be linear. There's going to be, unfortunately, more bad things happening.
Mayor Romualdez has been saying that relocation is not that easy. It's very complicated because there are a lot of issues. There's compensation, there's suitability of the land, and you have property issues as well.
Yes.
Given this reality and this situation, what's the best thing that can be done in anticipation of a possible a next typhoon coming?
Yeah, I mean, two things I would say is, one, we should not be looking at reconstructing the Visayas pre-typhoon. It's not possible. And actually it's not even desirable, because many people were suffering before the typhoon. They were very poor. So we're looking at a restructuring of livelihoods. This is going to involve a move out of agriculture to some extent. There's going to be some level of changing of livelihoods. There's going to be diversification of crops, because many people were working exclusively on coconuts or sugarcane in Ormoc. Those types of things are going to have to be diversified into smaller units. And then there is definitely going to be an urbanization that will happen, just because people are going to have to replace livelihoods with something that didn't exist before the typhoon. The second part is that we need to think very clearly about this aspect of living with a disaster. And I think Bangladesh, for example, does this very well, where you have people that have accepted that disasters are a way of life and a reality. So they know that floods and cyclones affect Bangladesh every single year in a seasonal kind of cycle. Mm-hmm. And they construct their shelter, their livelihoods to deal with that. And I think this is the sort of model that the Philippines needs to move towards in a place like the Visayas, rather than trying to either be too optimistic or to build structures that withstand, or we think can withstand everything, that we basically model livelihoods and shelters and systems around the disaster.
So the idea of building permanent houses, is this something that we should abandon? Or because now we have bunk houses and it's all temporary, and then you have to look for areas that are suitable for permanent housing.
Yes.
So what do you do? Where do you bring people who have lost homes?
Definitely, it's rather than looking at just the geography itself, because we're not going to find a place that's safe from the winds or from an earthquake. From the storm surge, yes, but not from the winds or the earthquake. So better than that is to say we need an integrated approach where we're linking livelihoods with shelter. Then on the second step, we need to say these shelters can withstand X amount of wind speeds, let's say 180, that would be great. If they can go, but there will be winds that are faster than that.
Yeah.
What some countries have figured out, such as Bangladesh, is that if you can take apart the house before the wind knocks it over, so you take down your roof, or you have collapsible kind of structures.
Portable housing.
Yes, exactly. Kind of, you take mobility, you sacrifice solidity, you take some aspects of mobility, you have glass that shatters so that it doesn't become projectiles. These types of things. Then, even if the house gets knocked down, it gets knocked down in a controlled fashion. And it can be restored quickly. So this is the sort of thinking that is maybe more useful in terms of not us also being over-optimistic and saying, you know, Haiyan was 380k winds, we're going to have 450 maybe. There's nothing you can do against 450k wind speeds. So all you can do is try and play around it and try and make the recovery as quickly as possible.
Another phenomenon that's come about, I think, I don't know how widespread it has become, but we've been getting accounts and stories about human trafficking. Have you received reports, and where do these people go, and who's behind them?
Yes, I'll be honest, we have not been tracking this seriously, but we've been talking about it. We think that human trafficking, I mean, as you know, the Visayas actually, this was a problem again before the typhoon, again, because of the poverty of the people there. The typhoon, the relief phase has actually helped people in the sense that they have had their minimum needs met. However, there are going to be, as the relief stops or slows down, people will resort to negative coping mechanisms. So we expect the trafficking to actually go up. Unfortunately, we expect other coping mechanisms, negative coping mechanisms such as substance abuse and things like that to happen, to increase.
So these are now the social problems.
Exactly, and this is where the relief has covered that, because the trauma doesn't set in until the relief stops. The PTSD and the kind of widespread trauma, social abuse, the real social problems will start when, you know, we stop the cash, we stop the food, we stop the donations. And people realize, oh my God, you know, I'm in a really bad situation right now. And that is another part of the reconstruction phase that is critical for us to meet, that kind of mental health support, that psychosocial support, that counseling, and being very clear in terms of providing that. Because otherwise, things like human trafficking will be the first choice that people see in terms of livelihoods, which would be horrible, of course.
Maybe just a few more points. If there are three things that you think government should pay attention to and give priority attention to, what are these things? What are these three things?
So in the RAY, and there's supposed to be a RAY 2.0, but in the RAY as it stands, only 5% is for livelihoods. So that needs to go up significantly, because livelihoods will be one of the key issues. The second thing is there has to be a better connection between the national government and the local government. So there has to be a better way of communicating between these layers, and there has to be a way for the money to flow from the top to the bottom. That would be the second thing. And I guess the third thing would be, maybe there needs to be an embracing of this idea of living with the disaster, if you want to, I don't know, we're still struggling for a word, but this kind of,
hard.
It's horrible,
hard, yeah.
And but in a way it's also empowering, because you're basically giving people power over the controlling of the disaster. Instead of saying, we're going to give you a promise that it won't happen again, which is a fake promise, you're saying it will happen again. We're going to try and mitigate and reduce the risk as much as possible in a controlled fashion, so that next time the destruction won't be as absolute as with Haiyan.
Oxfam's operations in the country has expanded, and I know that you started out with 40
Yes.
people, and now how many are you?
440 probably.
400 from
Yes.
40.
Yes.
Is this a good thing or a bad thing?
That's a good question. I mean, I think for Oxfam, we're proud of what we've been able to do the last 6 months. But there's that sort of nagging dissatisfaction, because again, this is a very basic model of relief, that there's a big INGO or big INGOs, or the Red Cross is very big. And we think that the Philippines has the potential to do better in terms of response. There's a very educated population. There's a very good infrastructure, private sector, transportation sector. low insecurity, low security risks.
Yeah.
So we think that next time it would be a success also if Oxfam didn't have to be this big, because the needs were being taken care of.
What you're saying is if the national government and the local governments were just doing their job, then the aid groups wouldn't have to be there in such a big scale.
Yes, I mean, our dream is to be redundant, right? We're not here to have a job, we're here to get out of the job. So that would be good, yeah, that would be a success, I think.
Okay, thank you very much. We've been talking to Oxfam humanitarian crisis expert Tariq Rebel about the challenges in rebuilding disaster-hit areas 6 months after Typhoon Haiyan. I'm Chai Hofelenia. Thank you for joining us.